I really do think that there's an evil that is telling people, hey, you can't have kids. It's financially impossible. It's really not. It is honestly pretty easy to raise kids.
My parents bought it in 1986 for $271,000, and then it just sold again recently for $1.8 million.
The amount of children that you can have, and honestly, a lot of life decisions are, like big life decisions, are just based on priorities. So
a big part of the reason why social life here in America is getting more and more difficult has to do with the fact that nobody can afford decent housing.
But if you are claiming that you can't have kids because of the economy, because of, this capitalist rat race, because of big business, and you'll never be able to make it work, make sure that you have fully evaluated your life and your choices and your priorities before you place the blame on somebody else.
I cannot believe that you can pay over $300 in non-refundable fees just to apply for an apartment.
I'm so embarrassed to be a part of this generation because I think everyone enjoys being the victim.
No one that works a full-time job should be facing homelessness. And that's what my family is facing right now.
Do you think it's possible that poverty is subjective?
Yes.
In some ways.
Yes.
Some, it's undeniable, obviously. But in some ways, what you would consider poverty might be different than what somebody else would consider poverty.
Everybody in America kind of knows, it's over.
Having children used to be a natural progression of life, but now with the cost of living crisis, many people are saying that having children just isn't worth the financial sacrifice. At the same time, others are arguing that every generation had their economic struggles, and this current market isn't bad enough to just give up on having children. So let's look into why people are saying they can't afford kids and if it's all just excuses. Creator Emma from TikTok is one of the creators that's been discussing this idea of millennials not being able to afford children. In this TikTok, she shares how her single income family with 11 children survived and thrived.
Hi, my name's Emma. I am one of 11. So I have 10 siblings. We live in Southern California, so one of the most expensive regions and one of the most expensive states. And I'm going to explain why I think this take is wrong, and honestly this whole mindset that really permeates our society that makes people think they can't have kids when really they can. I'll use my family as an example in a little bit, but first I just want to point out that the amount of children that you can have, and honestly a lot of life decisions are big life decisions, are just based on priorities. So whether that's your career or how many children you have or where you live or what kind of car you want to have or how big your house is, all of those things are going to play a part into how many children you can have. You only need childcare if you're prioritizing your career, and then that's just a priority. And you does not have to be working if you really didn't want to, because based on your priorities, you could downsize and all that. It's just all based on priorities. If my family can do it, you guys can do it. My family is not rich, okay? We're middle class, and we had even more than the average, a big family is 5 kids. So it's it just depends on where you decide to spend your money and how you decide to spend your money. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Emma says that what people deem as necessities can vary, and when you have children, that just means that your necessities change. The amount of children you can have is based on your priorities, your career, what car you drive, how big your house is, where you live. And I can get on board with this, if you want to spend all your money on traveling the world versus having a bunch of children. As well, the amount you spend on your children can vary depending on what you deem as important, like what school they go to, what clothes they wear, what food they eat, what sports they play, and obviously some people are going to spend more money on their kids than others. I try and be really intentional with what I buy for my kids and just trying to make sure that the things I'm getting them add value to their life. And that's why I'm really excited about today's sponsor, who is Kiwico. Kiwico has crates for all ages that are thoughtfully designed for your child's age. Finn just passed the 18-month mark, so we got him the Let's Look Panda crate. There's this drop maze toy. This one helps with hand-eye coordination, cause and effect. And then there's the wood cart and people, which is great for pretend play and also those fine motor skills, pushing it around. These wood color blocks are also really great for color recognition, balancing, and problem solving, trying to figure out how to stack them on top of each other. The balancing crayons are really cool because instead of just, offering crayons, it's a multifaceted toy. And then we did also upgrade to the Panda Crate Plus, which got us this racing toy. One thing that I really love about the Kiwico crates is that they're creating toys that are appropriate for the exact age that your child is, but the toys are also made to grow with them. Like these wood colored blocks, again, you can use them to build the car, but you can also use them for color recognition and mixing colors. It's a great way to introduce the topic before they're quite ready for it. And once we're ready to talk about mixing primary colors to create secondary colors, we already have the tools to do so. And just in this really busy time with 2 young kids, I really appreciate not having to think about what activities or toys are best for each kid's age. It's really nice to have the Kiwico experts do the research, do all the development for me, and I just have to open the crate and start having fun and learning with my kids. So if you're also looking for toys that help spark curiosity and discovery through play, check out the link in my description. That link will get you 20% off your first crate with Kiwico. Thank you so much to Kiwico for sponsoring today's video. Now let's go back to Emma's conversation about priorities in children.
On average, $100,000 for childcare is interesting to me because, like I said, that's just a priority. Like, my mom has always been a stay-at-home mom, and that's not a privilege. Like, that's it. You know, like, that's something my dad and my mom decided, and my dad had to work harder. My dad wasn't just handed, like, a salary all of a sudden where he could take care of 11 kids. No, when they started their family, he didn't have enough money to have 11 children. But living in America, I'm sorry, you're privileged, if you want to call it privilege for living in America. You're lucky to live here. If you work hard and you're willing to put in the work and, you know, based on what you learned in college and or what you decided to major in, all that stuff, you can grow your salary.
A few years ago, I would have been fully on board with some of Emma's points here, but so much has changed over the past few years that I just can't put all the blame on priorities being the issue here. The discussion about priorities isn't about people choosing to buy a brand new car or a house that's bigger than they need or any other luxury that's unnecessary. The reality we're dealing with now is this tension of whether people can afford groceries, healthy groceries, hopefully, rising rent, or maybe even to be able to own your own house one day. Emma says, if my family can do it, yours can too, as if it's the same world we're living in. So let's talk about what has changed specifically over the past few years and what it's like raising children in 2024 and onwards. Of course, the biggest issue right now for most people is the cost of living crisis. The 8% inflation over the past few years, that's more realistically like 50%, 100% depending on the item, has left people wondering if there's room left in the budget to have children. Over half of Gen Zers and Millennials surveyed said that they live paycheck to paycheck. Half of Gen Z and Millennials said that they expect starting a family to become harder or impossible. They're even more pessimistic about home ownership, 60% saying that they expect the financial goal to become more difficult or impossible. At least part of the reason we can't afford life right now is because inflation hit us so hard so fast and wages didn't have time to catch up. We were all living within our means until we weren't, and the problem is that for a lot of people, no amount of adjustments to the budget can take us back to 2016 living. One of the biggest contributors to financial insecurity with these new generations is the housing crisis.
The video of that little girl saying, if we just prioritize our children instead of our careers, then we'd be able to stay home with our kids. We just have to save a little harder, is quite literally the best example of not speaking on something you don't understand that I've seen on TikTok in a long time. My partner makes $100,000 a year, which if this was a few years ago would have been like more than a livable wage, but right now it is not. We want to buy a house by next year, and on my partner's income alone, that will not happen. I have to go back to work.
Between not being able to afford a house or even rentals in your area, Millennials and Gen Z are putting off having children until they feel more secure in their homes. I was going to try and break down how the cost of housing has changed so much in the past 50 years, but I figure I can leave that to someone else who's already crunched the numbers.
The boomers like to remind us of their 14% interest rates in the 1980s compared to our 7.5 today, and we should stop whining. But the average home was $47,000 in 1980, where today it is $436,000 for the average home. Let's compare that to salary. The average salary in 1980 was $12,000. It is only $56,000 today. So housing went up times 10, but incomes only went up times 4.5.
I do want to talk specifically about where I live, how much it costs to live here, because I obviously know my area better. And specifically where I live in Vancouver, BC, Canada, housing is very expensive. The average salary in Canada is $64,000, but unfortunately, you can't buy a detached house in the Lower Mainland here for under $1 million for the most part. And even if you were able to scrounge up a 20% down payment, $200,000, you would still be paying $5,200 a month for your mortgage payment, which you understand is not very realistic on a $64,000 income. And while this is all doom and gloom and the hottest topic of conversation these days, no, it doesn't mean you can't afford children, but it does start to break down the hope of giving our children the same standard of living that we had growing up. And in this situation, I think it's very valid that people are hesitant to be potentially giving up the opportunity to buy a detached house or even anything more than a one-bedroom apartment for having children, especially if it wasn't a big priority for them in the first place. One of the points Emma brought up is that your income when you have your children hopefully isn't always going to be your income. People have been saying this forever, that you don't need to be fully financially prepared for children because you can just figure it out. And that's what we did. We took a bit of a leap of faith in choosing to get pregnant when we were still in our rental. While it's not abnormal for people to have children in rentals, this was in 2019 when house prices weren't what they are now, but they still were quite high, so it felt like a little bit of a risk. I went into it thinking we'll make it work. Why wait when I have trust that we will get to a better living situation? But since then, the economy has done a 180, and I'm just not sure if I would have made the same choices now given the circumstances. In fact, while we're now in our own home, one of the main reasons I'm hesitant to go for a third child is I don't want to squish 3 kids in one room if I don't have to, and I just don't have a lot of hope that we'll be able to get a 3-bedroom home in the future. Mind you, I do live in one of the most expensive areas in the country, but I still think the point stands. With these insane house prices, a lot of millennials and Gen Z have completely given up on homeownership and have accepted their fate as forever renters. What was once a transitional phase of life where children left their parents' homes, went into rentals for a few years, and then graduated to homeownership, now has been cut short, and rentals are being lived in for longer than ever. Seeing as this is potentially the new normal for children to be raised in rentals, I wanted to look into what the effects would be on these children and whether only being able to raise children in a rental qualifies as affordability. While people can definitely thrive in a rental market and some people actually prefer it, we can agree, I think, that it is less stable, less secure. Rent, of course, can go up. Landlords can sell their house and kick you out at any time. Then you're forced to find a new rental where prices have gone up since you last looked. You can get rent locked because those prices have gone up so much. And of course, you can have a bad landlord. While there are a lot of responsibilities and costs that come with homeownership, it does feel safer bringing a child into a home that you own and are in control of. Somewhat, anyways. I found some studies that looked into the success of children from homeowners versus renters, and they found that children of homeowners are 2.6 less likely to drop out than children of renters. Homeownership by parents is also negatively and significantly related to whether daughters will have a child by age 17. As well, longer household tenure in the housing unit is associated with lower dropout rates. They do not find a significant impact of parents' marital status, family income, race, or age of the mother at the time the child was born on dropout rates. Now, this isn't to say that if you're a renter, your children will just automatically drop out of school. There's much to be said for when these articles were written, I think 2002 and 2015. Prior to 2020, middle-class citizens who were financially responsible could afford to buy themselves a house. An important aspect of these situations, and one that's stated by the articles as well, is that the effect of rentals on children is more of a reflection of the parents' emotional and financial stability, which, if poor, results in them being renters. One possible causal mechanism is that a child learns particular behaviors from parents who are homeowners, such as social skills, long-term planning. Whether homeownership causes the parent to have these characteristics, which are then transmitted to their children, or there is selection such that adults with these characteristics become homeowners, is an important avenue for future research. Another important note is that the length of time that you're in a single dwelling has a huge impact on your child's success. In the study we looked at before, they say that we found that owners with longer than average tenures had children who were least likely to drop out. Renters with long tenures had children that were about as likely to stay in school as owners with short tenures. Children of renters with short tenures had a considerably larger propensity to drop out of school than any other group. So from all of this, I do want to emphasize that children aren't doomed if they're brought up in rental homes, but there is strong evidence that the unstable home is what's causing these problems with the children. While renting in itself isn't inherently bad, if the rental is caused by financially irresponsible parents, or if the rental market is forcing you to move around a lot from lack of control of your housing, then we're seeing effects on the children. With all that being said, even if you're financially secure and you're locked into your rental, it is still crazy that this is expected to be the new normal for the average North American family, and we just need to accept it. One of the things I worry about most in these conversations about whether millennials and Gen Z can afford children is the lack of discussion about retirement plans. With all the financial struggles we're dealing with and the implications of being a renter for life, there's often no money left to put into retirement.
Not only is buying a home impossible for most millennials, but millennials who rent will have to save 50% more than homeowners in order to retire, which basically means most millennials who rent will never get to retire. This is specifically talking about millennials who are aged between 27 and 42 years old. So a millennial who rents their entire life would have to save up 8 times their salary in order to retire comfortably.
The elephant in the room is that if we don't have the resources to save for retirement, then we're putting that financial burden on our children.
Spot on. Our children are not our retirement plan. My kids are getting to watch me set healthy boundaries, and I'm not going to make decisions and how I handle my parents out of fear for whether or not my kids are going to care well for me. That's not their responsibility.
Hi, I'm Lars. I'm an only child of boomers who did not save for retirement, and now they can no longer sustain the life that they've lived for 50 plus years and are now being forced to move in with me across the country. And it's really hard for me to navigate the space where I feel like I'm the only person that can help them and that is going to help them. But at the same time, where were they when I needed help? When I was in college and didn't have any money and no support for, through that whole process. And so now I'm in my late 30s. My parents are in their early 70s, and we're being faced with these big life changes. And I feel like I literally have no option.
You don't care about retirement?
No, I don't.
Are you ever gonna have kids?
I would like to.
What about the moral responsibility of not having them feel obligated to take care of you in retirement? I love my parents. If they're in a situation where they can't retire, I am not allowing them to die on the street.
Shouldn't.
But you are forcing that on a potential kid. They're not gonna let you, because they're not gonna let you die. They're not gonna let you die in poverty.
Now I realize that this is a very Western idea, that we have the opportunities to save for retirement, so we should, and we shouldn't put that burden on our children to care for us financially when we are in our old age. But that's not how a lot of families in other countries do it. Joy Cho says her family came to the United States in 1975 with little money, but managed to connect with partners who helped them open a Thai restaurant in Philadelphia. Her parents didn't set explicit expectations that she would support them, but she knew it was something she wanted to do. She says, they worked so hard and did all the things they could for me so I could go to college and be on the path that I am now and have a family of my own. For me to be able to take care of them now at this stage of life is the least I can do. But there are also plenty of children who view having to care and provide monetary support for their parents as burdensome and wish they didn't have the cultural obligations. Elite is in a similar situation and says that for some it's a burden and for others it's an honor. So there are two sides of it, depending on the relationship you have with your family. But while my parents will rely on me to have the resources to live out their retirement, I would not expect any children I have to do the same for me. I've assimilated to the US retirement system with its individual retirement accounts and 401ks, and I'm saving for my own future. Starting with our children's generation going forward, it's never going to be like this again. There's a lot of gray area here, like Joy and Elite are saying. Immigrant parents who came to the country with nothing and did the best given their circumstances. I think it's an admirable responsibility to care for the parents that sacrifice so much to try and give you a better life in a new country. My issue with the Western American situation of being given all these opportunities to save for retirement, corporate greed and late-stage capitalism are taking taking it away from us. Prioritizing children in this economy doesn't just mean giving up extravagant vacations and brand new cars, but giving up owning your own home so you don't have mortgage payments or rental payments when you're 75.
My biggest concern with our country turning into a renter's economy is how will the millennial and Gen Zers retire comfortably if they don't own a house and are going to have to rent forever? Because if you look at 1994, the average house was $130,000 and rent was $450. If someone bought a house in 1994, 30 years later, today, that home is probably worth around $400,000 and it's paid off. That is part of their net worth. Rent is $1950, but they don't have to pay $1950 because their house is paid off. They have property taxes and homeowners insurance for only $600. So think about someone who's 58 to 68 who bought a house in the 90s. It's now paid off. They're not burdened with the high rent. They only pay $600 for housing. That is a big deal. Well, what if the same thing happens from 94 to 2024 in the next 30 years? The average house in 2054 will be $1.2 million, rent will be $8,500, but the property tax and homeowners insurance on this home will only be $2,000. So if someone was able to buy a house now or a couple years ago or in a few years, they'll have a house worth $1.2 million in their net worth. They won't be burdened with $8,500 and they can retire with a housing burden of only $2,000. But what about the people who can't buy a house and in 30 years they're going to be spending $8,500 on rent? How do you retire if your rent's going to be $8,500? You go, Freddie, that's ridiculous. Why? Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Vancouver are already spending $4,000 or $5,000. Why wouldn't Orlando, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Phoenix, why wouldn't it be $8,500? This is a major concern.
If the whole point of these conversations is about affording children, why aren't we talking about the lack of ability for millennials to set themselves up for retirement so they're not financially relying on their children in their old age? We're living in an economy where people can't even afford to pay off their student loans, let alone think of saving for retirement. I just don't understand why we're being called selfish for going child-free when some of us can't guarantee that we can give our children safe and secure lives. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes it feels like we're being fed these narratives to convince us to have more children to deal with the plummeting birth rates. The cost of daycare is also a big topic in this discussion about whether millennials can afford children, and it's one that Emma brought up as well.
And then the on average $100,000 for childcare is interesting to me because, like I said, that's just a priority. So I'll take my family for example. My mom has always been a stay-at-home mom, and that's not a privilege. That's something my dad and my mom decided, and my dad had to work harder and had to bust his butt so that he can make enough money for my mom to stay home and watch the babies.
Daycare hasn't been so much of an issue for us here in BC over the past few years because they recently passed a bill that allows $10 a day daycare for full-time care. This of course means that you as a mother can go back to work without worrying about whether you can afford daycare or not. But for you Americans, it has been one of the largest factors in the cost of living as the prices have gone up exponentially over the past few years.
31% don't want kids, on the fence about it because of childcare, which is a fair point because childcare costs have increased 214% since 1990, and childcare for one infant in 2020 was over $12,000 on average, $200 a week.
Emma says prioritizing your kids means not prioritizing your job and therefore staying home with the children. The problem is that in a lot of careers, you can't just take 5 years off and come back to the same job. Not to mention this is only if you're having one child, and most people have more than one child, so you're looking at more like 10, maybe 15 years out of your career.
My husband and I pay $60,000 a year for childcare, which is astronomical, but we will remain a dual income home as long as we're able to for several reasons. The astronomical cost of childcare is impacting women disproportionately to the way it's impacting men. Women are the ones leaving the workforce in droves for several reasons, the wage cap being one of them, societal norms, gender norms, you name it. There's many reasons women are the ones forced out of the workforce, but that's what's happening. They're being forced out of the workforce due to these astronomical childcare costs. And these costs continue to rise at such a rapid pace. They are outpacing groceries, housing costs, etc. Childcare is such a financial burden for families. And for me, I am not personally willing to take the career hit and the financial hit that would happen if I were to leave the workforce even for a short period of time.
So for a lot of mothers, they need to pay these astronomical daycare prices so that they don't lose their job altogether, even if that means just breaking even each month. Because by the time your kids are in school age, you'll have progressed in your career, hopefully increased your revenue, and you're able to provide better financially for your family because of it. But in the meantime, when we're talking at $2,000 a month for daycare per child, child, that understandably decreases your ability to afford more children or children in general. If we can't give up our careers because we live in a dual income world, then the amount of children we have is directly proportional to the cost of daycare per child and what your income is. Now on to the question of, are there other options to live differently and find ways to afford children despite the circumstances? There are obviously still people having children in this economy, and for some of them, they had to get creative in ways to afford it. Examples of this could be buying housing with community. If you can't afford your own house, maybe you can afford one with someone else. It's also growing more and more popular that parents are going in on housing with their children and co-living. If you don't know my situation, we couldn't afford a detached house on our own, so we ended up buying one with some friends, and we all live in here together with separate dwellings, of course, 2 houses in one. I hear a lot of people saying to move out of your expensive town if you can't afford it, and I think that's rude. Like, if we're talking about affording children and the benefits of having family close by, why is our first thought to just leave our family behind, our extended family? Like, maybe don't live in the most expensive hub, but I think we should have the right to live in adjacent cities. Now on to solutions for daycare. I don't have a lot of solutions, but we have seen some people adapt. One of the biggest ways is through work from home options. While it can be crazy trying to juggle caring for the children and working at the same time, my children are eating Rice Krispie Squares and watching a show right now. You're still able to get some work done, which is more than none. I also think we're coming up to a time where the nuclear family becomes less nuclear and we have to rely on extended family more, whether blood related or not. Like I said, with buying housing with family, but also relying on family for daycare. I know that's a touchy subject because not everyone has grandparents who are able to or willing to help with the children. Another way to balance work is to trade off childcare with other moms that you know. Again, it doesn't all have to be a blood-related community. That sounds kind of culty. But a lot of women will take turns watching each other's children, and this allows everyone to get one day off to work for that full day.
For the past couple years, my husband and I have a couple friend who has kids roughly around the same age as ours. And every Monday night, we will swap a date and the kids. So one Monday night, we will have all the kids, and they will go on a date. And then the next Monday night, we will go on a date while they have the kids.
While it is more work taking care of, say, 4 kids instead of 2, it still is worth it to have that day with 4 kids so that you get your own full day off. This is such an interesting conversation because just a few years ago, the world was so different and the middle class didn't have to find answers to all these new questions. And maybe where you are, things aren't so dire, but where I live, if you're under 30, we pretty much can't afford to live. Now, with all that being said, all the discussion of how crazy expensive it is to live right now, I think we're left with the question of what does it even mean to afford children? We definitely can't afford the simple middle-class life that our parents had, but does that mean we can't afford kids? Is living paycheck to paycheck, living in unstable homes, having no retirement plan, really enough to qualify as affording children? A lot of people don't want to give up a comfortable life for having kids, and I mean a very conservative type of comfortable, like to own your own home, to be able to afford groceries. Every kid has their own bedroom. Dare I say, go on a local vacation every year. It just feels dystopian to be telling people who can't pay their bills that they're being selfish for going child-free. Overall, I think it's really sad that we're forced to make these decisions of what we're willing to give up to have children, unless you're in the upper class. And with the declining birth rates looming over us and the implications it has on the economy in the years moving forward, you'd think government officials would be more inclined to help support people wanting to have families. If they could just create a society built to support family growth, they wouldn't have to sue women for discarding their petri dish babies. I do still have hope things will get better. You know, recessions aren't supposed to last forever, and maybe we'll even be able to get back to a time where choosing to have children wasn't a question of ruining your financial future.